Well, welcome again to another session of the Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. I'm Bob Hales. I'm your moderator. You got to put up with me all week and all next week. Uh, Keep in mind, we've got the Wall Street Journal as our sponsor this year. They've got a couple of workshops tomorrow and Thursday, and then a Q&A session. I have to tell you, the workshop they just finished was really interesting. I mean, really. And I learned things I didn't know, though some people would say I have a lot of things I don't know. So I don't know how much that means. But anyway, I would encourage you to drop by at least for a few minutes. It was actually very, very good. Certainly worth my time. Also, keep in mind, we record all these sessions. Uh, At the end of the conference, we will then have over 700 session recordings on a whole variety of topics. You're bound to find some things that would be useful to you. There's a link to the library on the conference homepage. Our session now is adding mobile learning to your pedagogy to increase engagement. And we have with us Dr. Sarah Nichter, who's, currently the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of the Cumberlands. She's also an associate professor of English. So if you're going to type something in, make sure you use good language, okay? So anyway, Sarah, let me turn it over to you now.
All right, thanks, Bob. I've put a link to two things in the chat that you guys can add to during the presentation. And so I'll show those to you really quick. The first one is the key questions document. The QR code that was on the previous screen, I'll go back to in a second, leads to this document. And so QR codes are one way to engage students in mobile learning, because a QR code can be made for anything online, documents online, web pages online, applications online, programs online, almost anything, polling online, so forth. So they're really flexible. So start thinking about what have been your own experiences with teaching with mobile learning. And then, as you can do these questions in any order that you want, but I'll refer to them in different parts of the presentation also. But think about, the course design that you might want to change or improve with mobile learning. On a smaller scale, a lesson you might want to change or improve with mobile learning. And then also a course policy that might be affected by mobile learning. Using it or not. And then the second document is the mobile learning timeline. And so this is, I think, pretty cool use of Excel. So it's just Excel, which should be accessible to most students. And so if you want to add something to the timeline, click on the year over here and type something in, like what So I put in there the rise of the MOOCs, I don't know, I forget the acronym, especially, but the large enrollment class, online classes, open enrollment classes. And so you might think, well, that's online learning. How does that have to do with mobile learning? I'll answer that question. You can add more than one thing to a line. And so if you think, well, 2013 was also important for something else, you can click on there and add something else. All right, so iPhone-ish. All right, so I'll give you kind of an overview of how the rest of this session will go, and we'll cover some key concepts like, what is mobile learning? What do I mean when I mention mobile learning? Oh, sorry, get my other apps out of the way there. And then I'll leave some time at the end to answer questions or share ideas. So then mobile learning, I think of that in terms of learning that is situationally based, and then also contextually based. So the context of learning, where they are in their learning journey, the situation that they're in, and then they can move through both of those in time, in content of the course, and then with the technology that they're using. So students might use their phone for something, to look something up while they're working on their laptop in their online class. They may use their tablet for one thing related to class, where they use their other device for another thing. And so all of that can be mobile learning. And then engagement, I think most of us have an idea of what student engagement looks like or counts for, but I like this definition from Hu and Koo, who've done a lot of research on this, and it's fun to say Hu and Koo, so yeah. But talking about the quality of effort that students give to their education, to their grades, to their own learning. And so if the idea is to improve the quality of effort that students give, and with the technology that they have, that can really be quite powerful. Because one thing about technology is students carry it with them everywhere. So whether you're teaching a face-to-face class, you may only see them an hour a day, or an hour and a half a day, I guess. But then they have the opportunity to engage with your content, with your class, for all the other hours. Maybe not all the other hours, but you get the idea, outside of your class. And wouldn't that be great if we can get our students to engage and think about our class again 2 hours later, when they're doing study time or when they're working on getting their assignments done. So one thing, these are other concepts I'll talk about through the session too, that giving students choice can be a good way to start engaging them in class more. If they have some say in what technology they use, but other things that you're willing to give up control for, then they can be more involved. And then to think about scope and scale. So think about scope in terms of breadth of something, how long you might use it in the course, and then scale, the depth of the technology that you might use. And so you might use, one technology all the way through the semester with one particular type of assignment, or you might use an app for a deep dive on a certain kind of learning concept. And then, of course, support and tech support. Your own experience with technology may make you comfortable with having to be tech support, or may make you uncomfortable with having to be tech support. So the first element we'll look at is course design. And so think about what element of your course you might want to change or improve with mobile learning. And so one thing I'll talk about today is I'll focus a little bit less on the types of apps or websites you can use, and more so these fundamental concepts that will help you choose which type to use. And actually, let me put this link in the chat also. And one reason I won't talk too much about which apps to use is this is a list that keeps growing, and I invite you guys to add to it also, of mobile learning friendly apps or programs, and I've organized it by the purpose for that app. For content delivery versus communicating with your students outside of class, or using apps for assessment. And so you can see that it can get pretty long, and it's always changing, always changing. So, because some apps die, some morph into something else. Yeah, and so talking about them what you can do for mobile learning with them could be another session in itself. So let me add that to the chat. All right. So then if we're thinking about course design, think about scope, scale, and support. Because if you're thinking broadly about your course, think about what technologies will be used, when you will use them. So then what technologies your students will need to have access to and for how long. How long they'll be used in a class session. Will they be used every day, every other day? Like an LMS might be used every day, but Kahoot might be used once a week, something like that. And then what kind of support you and your students will have if something goes wrong. Kahoot is really popular because it's easy to use. It's easy to make quizzes. You can use someone else's quizzes. And if anything goes wrong, Kahoot's support is pretty easy. Sometimes programs have really good tech support, or just tech problems aren't an issue, but you just never know. You'll want to, any technology that you choose, you'll want to test out the user experience before you expect your students to use it. And then also, if you're anything like me, I guess that you are, because you've signed up to be part of a all online conference, and a lot of the topics are about using technology and remote and online, and so I think we have that in common. I like technology a lot. I do not mind at all to have to use multiple programs in a day to get my work done or to create things. My students, though, are a different issue. And so we have to be concerned about how many programs they need to learn how to use and how many sets of usernames and passwords they need to be able to remember. And so think about the population that you're serving. For example, a class or population that I'm serving this semester, the spring semester, are at-risk students. And so I'll go here too, because this fits them. They have failed the class before, or their GPA has fallen low enough that they're on academic suspension. And so I have to approach that population a little bit differently. And they like technology, but they can get overwhelmed with it very quick. And they're not very good, or it's hit or miss, about keeping track of their usernames and passwords. And you would think like it might blow their minds to say, get a password keeper. Like, oh, I guess I could. And so that's something you'll need to think about, the abilities of the students that you're serving. So then as far as course design, you have some options, lots of options also. Generally, it's suggested in online learning, and so mobile learning is part of that, to have a combination of text versus images. It's good for viewing online, it's good for chunking information, and so forth. And then if you have videos, to add a script or captions to it. And so there are a lot of video programs that do captioning or automatic captioning. And so that technology has come a long way. But then also if you work from a script for your videos, then you also have that document you can share with your students instead of worrying about the accuracy of video captioning. Our campus uses Blackboard, and it's not very mobile friendly. And so I'll make a point to tell my students that early on. I'll urge them to check their grades, and they can do that through the Blackboard app on their phone if they want to, but that's about all they can do for our class on their phone through the Blackboard app. And so I want them to be aware of how they're doing in the class, But I also don't want them to think that they can submit their papers through there, because it's hit or miss if it comes through. So that's, you know, a constraint that I have to work with any of my classes on campus or online. And then also think about low tech versus high tech. Mobile learning doesn't have to be high tech if you don't want it to be. For example, our shared document with the key questions, that is low tech. You can do that I'm doing that in Word just because we're also a Microsoft campus. And so all our students have access to Microsoft 365. It's free for them. And I can share it pretty easily with Microsoft users or non-Microsoft users. Very similar to Google Docs. You can share it very easily across devices and so forth, and it's pretty low tech. And so if I were having students use a program like Quizlet, that's probably medium tech. They'd have to download an app and make a user profile, and then, or join our class, so forth, and then work with it that way. So you can have a combination of, you know, low tech, high tech that you're comfortable with. And then I see there's more in the chat. I'm just going to make sure and check for questions. Oh yeah, the number of logins. Yeah, I've heard of that one. Yeah, and so also the push to use captioning is for accessibility. And so think about, that's why I had on the previous screen, think about universal design. Instead of thinking about the different things you might have to do to make your content or course accessible to certain types of learners, think about what you can do to make it accessible to any kind of learner. And then that takes a lot of the burden off of you. And so here are some of those things you can do. You know, chunking information instead of having 3 pages of your lecture notes, just all your lecture notes, breaking them up into sections or contents. Thinking about leaving folders open. Even if a due date is passed, you may not want to leave a submission Dropbox open, but you can leave that weekly content open. So students can go back and review as they want to. You know, depending on your preference, try to have a variety of assignments or ways to share information, shareable documents. That's a really good sort of example of making your content available to any kind of learner. They can access it whenever, however they want to. And then decide if you want to be paperless or semi-paperless. Since I teach writing classes, you might think that I'm not paperless, but all my classes, I tell them we're semi-paperless. I get them to write in class, in the moment, as informal assessment types of things. For formal assessments, the final drafts of papers, those are submitted online and they need to be typed, and they're paperless that way. Okay. So other than course design, as you start to think about, I think I want to use this kind of program throughout my term or throughout my semester, then think about how you might use that. Lessons with a small L versus a capital L. And so one way to think about being purposeful, I was about to combine a bunch of words there in my head, being purposeful about using mobile learning is to think about one particular lesson. Some lessons may be more apt to that, others may not. And so also, if you're thinking of mobile learning in terms of just a smartphone, think also in terms of laptops. Laptop batteries last longer than they ever have before. They're video quality and cameras and so forth are better than they have before. And so worrying a little bit less about, oh, my student will do this on their phone versus they'll do this with the device they're most comfortable with. And so then designing an assignment that fits across all those different contexts. All right, so then think about if the assignment is technology centered or technology supported. So in writing, it could go either way. I need to teach my students how to write in the digital age. Handwriting is mostly for my own efficacy sometimes, because I don't want 25 individual emails during class. But then also to teach them how to use that skill of handwriting to record their thoughts, and then compare and swap with students and so forth. So that's not technology supported. That's a learning skill that I don't need technology to have. But teaching them how to intuitively use grammar checkers is a skill I want them to have. And so I have designed some assignments to use Grammarly feedback. We have Grammarly Premium subscription for campus-wide. So for students, faculty, staff, employees, so forth, we can all use Grammarly. And I think it's great, but Grammarly is not perfect. Like Grammarly wants to hyphenate lots of things that don't need to be hyphenated. And it's not very good at finding fragments, but it's really good at pointing out sentences that are kind of clunky. Or punctuation. It's really good at picking up punctuation errors. And so I've designed some assignments that focus on using that technology to help them understand how to use feedback and use it to improve their writing. Because some students will just they'll just accept every change that Grammarly wants to make, and then they've made some more errors. And they're like, well, Grammarly is always telling me something's wrong. I'm like, well, you've got to be a little bit more aware of the technology you're choosing. Well, like we can talk about ChatGPT later if you want to, but those kinds of writing assistance programs are here to stay. And so to think about how to tell my students to use those well in the future, because knowing that they probably will. Again, that is that's a writing skill I want them to use in the presence of technology, rather than learn this technology to do something. If you're teaching a technology class, then it might be the other way around. The learning that technology is much more important than what they create with it. And so then also, if you can, that student choice, giving them options about how they submit the final product, can give them a lot of investment in that assignment and then engagement in that assignment. And then think about if things are low stakes or high stakes. Not everything has to be for a grade. I was looking through the presentation briefs, and there's a really good session coming up. There's a bad plug for it because I don't remember if it's Wednesday or Thursday, but about, don't think about ungrading, but think about using these assessment tools or these assessments in class. And so that can be really useful too. I'm reading the comment about the ChatGPT. Yeah. I'm not scared by ChatGPT. Okay, so by now in the presentation, you're probably going, okay, I have lots of choices. And so this clip from Indiana Jones says it well. Yes, you have lots of choices, but you must choose wisely. So these are some common design features among well-designed online classes, well-designed mobile learning lessons or programs or apps or classes, that can be very good for student engagement and a seamless use of mobile technologies. You know, if a document is shareable, if any kind of document is shareable, it can also be collaborative. And then also if instead of having students, for example, just turn in the final draft of their paper, having them turn in their rough draft, and then working with Grammarly to revise it, and working with SafeAssign to understand how well they have cited their sources or not, and then submitting in a revised draft, and then submitting in a final draft. And for teaching writing, that actually takes a lot of the grading pressure off for me at the end of the semester, because they've already done a lot of the changes in those progressive submissions. I've seen what they've been working on, and I can make a better judgment how well they've improved or not, sometimes. Oh, thank you, Javier, for for adding that link, ungrading alternative session. All right. So then let's think about course policies. So what are some course policies you guys have used before concerning technology in general? Like, has anyone had a policy that read something like, you know, no phones in class? Has anyone had students comment to them that they've had teachers that wouldn't let them use phones in class? Hmm, they've heard of that. And I hear that frequently, but I also know that, like, most often the population I'm teaching are freshmen and sophomores. And so their previous educational experience is typically high school, which my guess is still they're pretty strict on allowing phones in class. Yeah, and Lisbeth, that approach is a pretty common one, and probably the best one, the one that anecdotally that faculty say works better for them. And so and it works with that variation too. It's not all or nothing. And it's something that could be very manageable to say, yes, you can use your device in class as long as it's for class. I got on to a student today who I asked him a question and left the silence to hang there until they answered it. And then music started playing from his phone that he had, you know, in his book, like he's looking at the book, but I could see his phone. And he's like, oh, sorry. And I said, well, that's okay. Since we're not doing anything with our phones right now, you could put that in your backpack. Yeah. And so, you know, he's like, yeah. And everyone else in the class was like, ha 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 ha. And so just having those, either we have device days that, you know, bring your device to class, BYOD, that's bring your own device, or be prepared because at the beginning of every class, you can use your phone to respond to the polling, or we're going to use it for, you know, for this lesson or something like that. Letting your students know ahead of time how you expect them to use their devices for education can be really impactful. The assumption is often that younger students, being quote digital natives, know what to do with their devices is just an assumption. Some of them are quite savvy with their devices, and they, you know, if they want to look something up, they have the dictionary app on their phone, or they know how to how to phrase a search term to find the answer. But that's not true all across the board. And so students come to college with all these different uses for their personal devices, and they might have a line like, well, I don't want to use my phone for class because it's just too small and clunky or whatever, or I never have it fully charged. And so they want to do everything with their laptops. And so giving them that choice can be empowering and have them engage with that. I literally had to tell a student who couldn't remember his password for a program that we use every week. And he said, well, I have it saved on my device, on my laptop in my dorm room. I was like, well, bring your laptop to class. He's like, I can do that? Yes, bring your laptop to class, because every Wednesday is bring your own device day. And you're like, oh, okay. Next week, you brought it to class. So yay. So also think about submission file types. Oftentimes we can sort of get into the default of whatever program we were used to submitting assignments for is what we'll require our students to use because we're familiar with it. For example, I'm most familiar with Microsoft products, but if someone has a Mac computer, I shouldn't put restraints on them to not use their Mac because I'm not sure how to use Mac programs. If they choose to have a Mac, they hopefully will know how to submit assignments from that device or learn how to do that. I've learned how to, help them do that. But so then also instead of saying it always has to be a Word document, say it has to be a typed document with this format. And here are some tips for programs that will keep that format. So I'll accept PDFs, I'll accept open office documents, I'll accept for some assignments, Excel files, and then, some other file types like that. Think also about communication options. Some classes things and communicate things